What? I don't understand at all. When I went to a city I usually don't visit for shopping, I witnessed my husband and my mother walking arm in arm, kissing each other openly without any reservations. I was taken aback, so I rushed over and questioned them. But they weren't sorry at all. They just confidently explained themselves. I immediately went to my parents' house, told my father about the two of them, and got a divorce. But after my father passed away, I had to meet my mother and ex-husband again. I noticed my mother wearing loose clothes and her belly sticking out when I saw her after a long time. Noticing my gaze, she laughed triumphantly. Oh, you noticed? I'm pregnant. You've been waiting, but it seems you couldn't get pregnant.
Unlike you, we were able to have a child quickly. Now I can finally become a father. I'm glad I divorced you.
The two of them hurled insults meant to hurt me as much as possible. However, their intentions were misplaced. Unfortunately for them, I was not hurt at all. Oh, this is funny. Both of you are such fools. I held my stomach and laughed. My name is Mary, a 24-year-old office worker. My parents had me when they were very young. It was what you might call a shotgun wedding. Both of my parents were quite flashy when they were young, and my mother, Abby, met my father, Keith, when she was just 16 and still in high school. He was 4 years her senior and working in construction when they met and had me. Their love story began when my mother fell in love with my father at first sight and aggressively pursued him until he gave in and they started dating. Soon after, my mother got pregnant and they got married. Being married while still in high school was frowned upon by society, and there was strong opposition from those around them. However, since my mother was already pregnant with me, they had to accept the marriage. At first, everything seemed to be going great for the young couple and their marriage. My father would come get me in kindergarten on days he couldn't work in construction because of the rain. Mary, your dad is so young and cool. Right? I love my dad. He's so kind. I enjoyed sharing an umbrella and talking about the day's events with my father on the way home. However, an accident happened to my father which drastically changed my mother's attitude towards him. During the dismantling of scaffolding at work, he accidentally fell and suffered severe injuries. My father got all beat up and broke a bunch of bones, so now he can't move around much. And then my mother just shut down emotionally out of nowhere. Thankfully, he survived, but he was left with physical disabilities and could no longer continue his construction work. Thanks to rehabilitation, my father was able to walk again and managed to re-employ himself through a friend at a corporation. However, he still needed long-term rehabilitation after being discharged from the hospital. Despite this, my mother refused to have anything to do with his commuting to the clinic or daily assistance, ignoring him when he fell in the hallway and couldn't move, or throwing sarcastic comments his way. Ugh, look at you, falling over. Ugh, how pathetic. Marrying such a burden was a mistake. I should have looked at other men before settling down. As a child, my mother would frequently vent her frustrations about my father as if it was a habit. However, to me, it seemed like she was just bullying him, and I honestly didn't like her very much. Since my father had to reduce his work to attend hospital appointments, we were far from a wealthy family. My mother worked at night, so I spent more time during the day with my father and felt closer to him than to my mother. She probably saw that, or maybe she just never really cared for kids, but my mother pretty much ignored me and only did the basics for me. I was at least allowed to finish high school, but after graduating, my mother told me to work to help with the household finances instead of going to college. So I ended up working at a small local company.
I'm sorry, Mary. It's because of my condition that you have to bear such a burden.
I don't say that. I'm happy to work if it helps you, even a little. My father apologized, looking regretful as I decided to work without pursuing further education. Even though I wasn't feeling doing things my mother's way, I was going to push through for my father. After a few years of employment and getting accustomed to my job, I married Greg, a colleague at work. I wanted to create a warm family life with him, unlike the cold relationship my parents had.
I'll take care of you, Mary. Let's be happy together. I want lots of children.
I happily accepted his proposal, delighted by his words. However, a year into our marriage, there was no sign of children between Greg and me. I wanted children, but no matter how long I waited, there were no signs of pregnancy. Greg started pressuring me as if it was entirely my fault.
Why can't we have kids? All my colleagues already have children. There must be something wrong with your body. Ugh, what a disappointment for a wife.
Don't say that. It's not just my problem. I want you to go to the gynecologist with me for tests.
What? Why should I bother with such a hassle? I've been healthy and never even got a cold. It's definitely your fault we don't have kids.
My husband wouldn't even consider fertility treatments and just kept blaming me for not getting pregnant.
Stop making excuses and get treated at a hospital. It's crushing my reputation to be married and not have kids.
No matter what I said, he wouldn't listen, and he continued to blame me one-sidedly. Yet clinging to a thread of hope, I struggled alone with fertility treatments, but there was still no sign of a child. Gradually, Greg started not coming home. He claimed he was busy with work and often returned home in the morning. I thought, is it really work? I wonder, could he be cheating? That time too. I had several reasons to doubt my husband. Sometimes I smelled women's perfume on his clothes when he returned home in the morning, not just once, but several times. Furthermore, when I checked the credit card statements, there were regularly unexplained expenses, which fueled my suspicions even more. However, I thought confronting him directly would just result in him evading the issue, so I was looking for the right moment to talk. The opportunity came sooner than expected. When I went shopping in a city I usually don't visit, I saw my husband who has said he was working that day. I thought, is that Greg? But he's supposed to be working today. I was about to call out when I noticed a woman beside him. I thought, huh? Why are Mom and Greg walking together? There, my mother was walking beside him, smiling cheerfully. Since getting married, I have kept a distance from my mother. I visited my father at home occasionally, but I hardly ever brought my husband to my parents' house. There shouldn't have been any conversation between my husband and my mother since our marriage greetings. Wondering about this, I watched their actions without calling out, and to my surprise, they held hands affectionately and eventually kissed right in front of me. What? I don't understand. I exclaimed out loud. Unaware of my astonishment, the two of them continued walking away. Finally, I shouted out, "Hey, Greg! Mom! What are you doing?" When I ran after them and called out, they looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Oh, what's wrong, Mary? Why are you in such a hurry?" "What do you mean, what's wrong? What are you two doing?" "I don't know what you're talking about. I just happened to meet Greg and we were just saying hello after a long time. Is there a problem?" It seemed my mother intended to play dumb. The way my mother dressed made her look young. If not told, one wouldn't think she was in her 40s. Approaching my mother, I realized something. I thought, this scent. I smelled it somewhere before. Then, I recognized the smell of my mom's perfume. It was the same scent I had smelled on my husband's clothes when he came home late. I didn't want to believe it, but I was convinced that my mother was my husband's affair partner. "Don't lie. I just saw you and Greg kissing."
Huh? It must be some mistake. We just bumped into each other.
When confronted, they looked momentarily flustered and exchanged glances, but after a brief silence, Greg spoke as if giving up.
I didn't think it would come out this soon. Why are you even here?
"What do you mean by that?"
I thought I could fool you a bit longer since you're so clueless, but I didn't expect to be seen. Well, as you might have guessed, I actually prefer older women.
"Sorry. I did feel bad for you, Mary, but I liked Greg from the moment we first met." My mom and husband didn't hold back and confessed to the unbelievable truth. We just happened to meet one time, and as we talked over a cup of coffee, well, one thing led to another. I'm still young, and I want to experience love.
Our marriage was already rocky, and the more I talked to Abby, the more I was drawn to her.
I heard, Mary, that you were having trouble having kids. Greg really wants a son, and it's your fault that he can't have one. Poor thing.
I can't believe it. You told my mom that? Because it's true. There must be something wrong with your body that you can't have kids.
Unbelievably, my husband has shared all our very private marital issues with my mother. Despite my struggles with not being able to have children and his refusal to listen to any of my consultations, my husband blamed me as if he were the victim. Anger welled up inside me, and I realized I could never continue my married life with this man. You're the worst. Do you even realize what you did? I yelled at the two of them as they nonchalantly made excuses. It can't be helped. You're a failure as a wife and as a woman, so this is what happens. What? I never even want a husband like you. I don't need you anymore. Give me a divorce.
Sure. Honestly, I've been bored with you for a long time, always making excuses and not being able to have kids. It's relieving to think I can be rid of a defective wife like you.
Oh, I didn't mean for this to happen, but I guess I ended up stealing your precious husband. Sorry about that. Despite not really feeling sorry, my mother offered a mere lip service apology. You realize if you tell Dad about this affair, he'll divorce you. You better be prepared. Upon hearing this, my mother's face changed, but she quickly returned to her complacent expression. There's no proof of the affair anyway. It's up to you and Greg if you want to divorce, but I'll divorce when I feel like it. Now, Greg, let's go. Prompted by my mother, the two of them left me behind and hurried away. Although clearly in an adulterous relationship, unlike Greg, my mother didn't want to divorce my father just yet. I immediately went to my parents' house and told my father about them. So I thought she needed a mother for Mary and endured it for years. But I never expected her to disregard her daughter like this. Upon hearing my report, my father grimaced as if he had bitten into a sour bug. Greg and I are getting a divorce. I can't imagine staying married after what happened. What will you do about Mom? Don't worry, I have a plan. I won't let them have their way. Later, Greg sent me a divorce paper already filled out, which I signed, and our divorce was finalized. My mother hasn't returned home since then, and it seems she eloped with Greg. Although I was upset, my father told me to let them go, and I decided to forget about my ex-husband and mother. After that, I moved out of the apartment where Greg and I lived and returned to my parents' house. My father's condition had improved significantly, and he could almost take care of himself. Ironically, my mother's total lack of assistance seemed to have helped. Though things turned out this way, I'm happy to be living with Mary again. Thanks for coming home. I have been enjoying a brief period of peace with my father, but that life did not last long. Father caught pneumonia that was going around, and suddenly he was on the brink of death. Mary, I've made you endure so much up until now, and I'm truly sorry. From now on, live as you wish. As he was about to pass away, within his fading consciousness, he gripped my hand tightly and said that. With tears in my eyes, I nodded. Despite the efforts to treat him, my father's condition rapidly worsened, and he passed away. I thought, Dad, I can't believe you passed away so suddenly. I wish I had been there more to take care of you. As I was preparing for my father's funeral, an unexpected person visited our home. Long time no see. I heard he died. My mother and my ex-husband, Greg, were at the door. Wearing unpleasant smiles, they boldly walked into the house. What do you want now? Leave. What? Who do you think you are? He was my husband. Isn't it natural for a wife to come running when her husband dies? How can you say that after you eloped and cut off all contact for years? Whatever. Say what you want. But no matter how much you scream, I was his wife. That means I have a right to his assets. He had insurance, didn't he?
Ugh, I'm appalled. So that's why you didn't divorce Dad?
After retiring from his construction job due to an injury, my father worked diligently in a company and had reached a considerable position before he passed away. Even though he didn't go to school, I bet it was all the hard work he put in as a craftsman that made him tough. He had many colleagues who admired his caring nature. It was worth not divorcing him. Now let's talk about dividing his assets. He wasn't materialistic, so I know he must have saved a lot. Saying this, my mother approached me aggressively. Looking at her, I noticed something. My mother was wearing baggy clothes, and you could totally tell that her belly was big. When she noticed my gaze, she laughed triumphantly. Oh, you noticed? Yes, I'm carrying Greg's child. Seems you could manage to do that, Mary. I'll bear the child instead of you.
Unlike you, we were able to have a child quickly. Now I can finally become a father. I'm glad I divorced you.
The two of them hurled the most hurtful insults they could. However, their plans were to be thwarted. Unfortunately for them, I was not affected at all. Oh, this is funny. Both of you are such fools. I held my stomach and laughed. Seeing this, they looked at me bewildered.
What's so funny?
Because it's just ridiculous. But hey, this might be hard to say, but are you sure that child is really yours? At my words, Greg seemed offended and asked back, Huh? But my mother's demeanor suddenly shifted. Her eyes darted around, visibly shaken. Yet Greg seemed oblivious to her discomfort.
She's pregnant with my child, no doubt. Don't say nonsense just because you're bitter.
Yes, that's right. Stop being so sore. Huh. Well, seeing this will clear things up. I stepped away and grabbed a document I had kept, presenting it before them. What's this all of a sudden? Huh? What?
What's so shocking about it? It must be nothing. Huh? What does this mean?
Both were stunned as they read the contents of the document. It was a report from a detective agency summarizing my mother's affairs. After she eloped with Greg, I happened to see her in town by chance. However, she wasn't with Greg, but with a completely unknown young man. Following them discreetly, they entered a hotel. I thought, what does this mean? Could it be that Mom is... I consulted with my father before his death and decided to investigate my mother's conduct, thinking it might prove useful someday. The detective's investigation confirmed that my mother was indeed involved with a man other than Greg. Greg, reading the document desperately, saw detailed information about my mother and her lover. After finishing the report, Greg glared at my mother beside him.
What is this? Were you deceiving me?
That's not true at all. Mary is lying. This child in my belly is yours, for sure. While my mother was flustered, she insisted that the child was definitely Greg's. Who are you going to believe? This child and me, or her?
Well, that's right. She couldn't have kids herself, so she's framing her own mother. What a terrible woman.
Greg was persuaded by my mother and seemed to regain his composure. Deciding the report was a lie, he began blaming me, ignoring their own issues. It's your freedom to not believe, but unfortunately I have decisive proof. You can come out now. I called into the living room next to where we were. The door opened, and a man entered.
Huh? Who is that?
Who is he? I don't know him either. Both were puzzled by the appearance of the unfamiliar man. This is my husband. You wouldn't know, but I got remarried. His name is Ryan. A year after divorcing Greg, I remarried him, whom I met through a friend.
How does this man prove anything?
Unlike Mom, it might not show yet, but I'm also pregnant. Of course, with his child.
So what? Say it clearly.
You still don't understand? When I was married to you, no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't have a baby. But with him, with Ryan, I got pregnant right away. Greg seemed to realize the implication of my words and widened his eyes in shock. You didn't want to deal with the hassle of going to the hospital, but I did get tested and found out that there was nothing wrong with my fertility. That means the problem was with you.
That's not true.
But it's strange, isn't it? Despite being supposedly hard for you to have children, my mother is pregnant. Are you sure it's really your child? As I questioned him, Greg couldn't argue and instead glared at Abby beside him.
Hey, tell the truth.
Ah, fine, you win. Oh, you admitted it pretty quickly. I thought you would try to deceive us more. It was just a fling with Greg anyway.
What do you mean by that?
I was with you because you were Mary's husband. You know, it's tempting to want what someone else has, but my real relationship was with another man. I was planning to break up with you soon anyway. Greg was shocked by my mother's words and stood there dumbfounded. I was enjoying the affair until it got spoiled. Well, it doesn't matter whose child I'm carrying. My rights to his inheritance remain unchanged. Are you still talking about that? Unfortunately, you'll have to give that up. Huh? How many times do I have to say this? I wasn't divorced from my dead husband. I have the rights to the inheritance. That's what I'm telling you. You don't have any rights, because you and Dad were actually divorced a long time ago. Huh? That can't be. Maybe you've forgotten because you're getting older, but Dad had a divorce paper that you had signed already. When I reported my mother's affair to my father, he revealed that he had a divorce paper. According to my father, during a big fight when he became unable to work because of his injury, my mother had shoved the already filled out divorce paper at him, saying, I don't need a husband who can't move. Though he kept it without filing because I was still there, my father had used that divorce paper to legally separate from her before he died. So, Mom, you won't get a penny from Dad's estate. Do you understand now? Huh? That's... Upon hearing my words, my mother, who had been acting so confidently, turned pale. Greg was still glaring at her. I'm going home. After realizing her affair had been exposed and that she wouldn't receive any inheritance, my mother fled the house as if running away. Later, my mother did give birth to a boy, but it was clear without even a DNA test, just from the blood type, that he wasn't Greg's child. Greg, having said,
I never thought she was such a whore,
discarded my mother when he realized he couldn't get any inheritance and disappeared. The man who was supposedly my mother's main affair partner also fled upon learning of her pregnancy, as he had only been in a casual relationship with her. Eventually, my mother, at the age of 40, became a single mother with a young child. With no one to turn to, she's raising the child of the man who abandoned her with government assistance. Being an older mother, she seems to be aging significantly due to the strain of raising a small child. One time I saw my mother far away with her son, and she looked more like a grandmother than a mother with all that gray hair. Meanwhile, I gave birth to a healthy girl, and now our family of 3 lives happily. Thinking about it, the child my mother had is my brother, and he will be in the same school year as my daughter, which is quite complicated. We plan to visit my father's grave together on the anniversary of his death. Though the betrayal of my ex-husband and mother was painful, it also led me to find an invaluable family. He must be watching over us from heaven, don't you think? My Father in heaven must be happy about the birth of his granddaughter. With the love he gave us, I vow to keep walking closely with my family.